Welcome to In This Body, a podcast where we dive deep into the potent power of embodiment. I'm your host, Ailey Jolie, a psychotherapist deeply passionate about living life fully from the wisdom within your very own body. The podcast In This Body is a love letter to embodiment, a podcast dedicated to asking important questions like, how does connecting to your body change your life? How does connecting to your body enhance your capacity to love more deeply and live more authentically? And how can collective embodiment alter the course of our shared world? Join me for consciously curated conversations with leading experts. Each episode is intended to support you in reconnecting to your very own body. This podcast will be available for free wherever you get your podcasts, making it easy for you to stay connected to In This Body, the podcast with me, Ailey Jolie. Welcome back to How to Be in This Body. I'm your host, Ailey Jolie, and today I'm joined by Brandon Nappi. Brandon Nappi is a spiritual teacher and retreat leader whose work lives at the intersection of Christian mysticism, mindfulness, and contemplative practice. What I deeply admire about Brandon is his ability to weave together ancient wisdom and contemporary life, creating spaces where silence, presence, and healing become accessible to everyone. From the incarcerated communities to NBA coaches, from clergy to Fortune 100 leaders, as the founder of Copper Beach Institute, a global spiritual community, and as a lecturer at Yale Divinity School, Brandon invites us into the living heart of contemplation, not as escape from the world or the body, but as a radical way of being fully present within it. His work reminds us that contemplative practice is not confined to monasteries or mountaintops. It's a path of healing available to anyone who's willing to get in touch with their very own body. Today, we'll explore the intersection of Christian mysticism, Zen, Buddhism, and Somatics. We'll also explore how spirituality and religion can be a way to enter the body, not just transcend it, while also touching on men's work, the role of patriarchy, and so much more. If you're interested in the intersection of soma and spirit, body and soul, this is an episode for you. I hope you enjoy this episode of How to Be in This Body with me, Ailey Jolie. So the first question I have for you today is one that I start the podcast often by asking guests, and I would love to hear from you what the phrase being in your body means to you.
Thank you for this question. I've loved listening to the podcast and hearing how different guests have expressed this differently. And it's a bit of a challenge. It's sort of like trying to describe my love for my daughters or the love that I have for my beloved partner 25 years, right? And at any moment when you try to describe this kind of relationship, the words fall short. So I think the word that comes to me that feels most organic is home, right? My body is my home. And if you've ever been homesick or ever felt this longing to be back in a place that was a comfort, a cocoon, a place where you can just be yourself, you could be authentically you. That's what my body has come to mean to me. It's my home. And yet I don't know that answer would even have been intelligible to my younger self 20 or 30 years ago. So I say that I don't know, is some amount of gratitude, no small amount of pride. And that, I don't know how I would answer that question, in another 20 or 30 or 50 years, but that feels like the answer today.
I love it. I would love to hear a little bit more, if you feel comfortable, about how you kind of got to where you are today, how you've ended up there with that answer of the body being home, what you studied and what you offer, and a little bit of your path for the listener who doesn't know you.
Thank you. Yeah, I grew up in a rather traditional second-generation Italian-American home in Waterbury, Connecticut, once the brass capital of the world. And my family traditionally went to church on Sunday. They weren't terribly religious, but, in the 70s, Italians went to church. And there were two experiences that defined my path in a way that I wasn't even aware of at the time. But now, in retrospect, I look back and I thought, gosh, that was everything. And the first is being in church and hearing the story from the gospel about the Good Samaritan. And Jesus is asked this question, who's my neighbor? And Jesus tells the story of a man who's beaten and left for dead on the side of the road, and religious leaders pass by, and all sorts of folks pass by, and the Samaritan, who would have been a bit of an enemy to Jesus' listeners in the story, so not the typical hero, he takes care of his wounds. He binds him up and pours oil on his wounds and literally picks up his wounded body and puts it on his donkey and pays for a room for him for the night for his healing. And I remember looking around and thinking how profound and how transformative. And if we could all just love each other this way, if we could bind up one another's wounds, if we could hold each other's bodies in this way with this kind of tenderness and compassion and not be apathetic to the needs of others, the world, this is it. In my little 6-year-old mind, oh my gosh, this is it. This is the key. And I remember looking around and thinking, why is everyone so bored and so dull to this message, right? I was so excited, and who knows what was happening, right, in the minds of everyone else around me. But this was a moment I thought, oh, I want to somehow be a part of holding the wounds of the world. And as I got older, I remember working as a church janitor in that same little church, the St. Lucy's in Waterbury, Connecticut. It's not there anymore. But as the church janitor, it was my job to, in the summertime, to just clean and dust. And I was in this dark but beautifully illuminated by all this stained glass, this sacred space, which was silent. And I realized, wow, I really love the silent, empty space of the church, even more than going to church and being with the people. It's always so complicated being with the people. And I could just remember seeing the way in which the light would come in the afternoon, the dust would sort of dance through the afternoon light. And I didn't have a name for the luminous. I didn't have a name for a mystical experience, but I was encountering this infinite mystery in utterly profound and simple ways. And so silence and caring for the wounds of the world became the path for me. Of course, as a little Catholic boy, priesthood was the only way I knew how to do that. And so after college, after studying mysticism, medieval mysticism especially, and learning Latin, and studying theology, and learning Italian to study in Rome, I entered seminary, and I entered a specific seminary at the University of Notre Dame, where I did my undergrad, and it was a sweet place, a wonderful place. In fact, I'm returning there next weekend to reunite with some friends. But my real dream was to be a Franciscan priest and to follow in the footsteps of St. Francis, who just had this overflowing, sensual, no holds barred, almost romantic, if we can use that term to describe someone in the 13th century, willingness to give himself courageously to other people, so much so that he would kiss people who were suffering. And he went in the middle of the piazza there in Assisi, he took off all his clothes and he gave his life to the poor. And I thought, if I can't do it that way, I don't want to do. So I entered a Franciscan seminary, and I had this call to actually be a partner, which of course is not possible in the Roman Catholic tradition. And so I left that seminary. I met my wife on a blind date, and she was the wisest person that I ever met, practicing Buddhism and working in somatics, and helped me understand that this body was not something to transcend, not something to only train or punish. And I went to divinity school, and when I finished divinity school here at Yale, I went on to lead retreats. We can talk later about meditation and Zen and how that shifted my life, and worked on a doctoral dissertation that looked at Zen Christian dialogue. And so for nearly 20 years as a spiritual teacher, I've been helping people to befriend themselves, to make peace with themselves, to befriend their bodies, and to encounter the sacred, whatever that means to them. And I've worked with traditionally religious folks, spiritual but not religious folks, our friends who don't even know what category they find themselves in, because human life is bigger than any category, right? So all of that has taken me back here to Yale to teach and to do one-on work with folks who are struggling and suffering in all walks of life, especially celebrities I've gotten to work with. So it's been quite a journey. There's much more to say, but I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you for that. And I would love to hover back to one moment, because the story I'm making up in my mind is that it may have been Overwhelming isn't quite the right word, but I imagine a little disorienting or discombobulating when you met your wife and she was like rooted in Buddhism and somatics. And I would love to hear how that fusion or intersection of principles and ideology and alignment came to be, or what it kind of morphed into when you brought those two things together through the union the two of you created and committed to.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. Again, it was like a homecoming for me. It was as if I had found that I had had a second lung to breathe with, and I had been breathing only with one lung for 25 years. Oh, right. And I understand that for certain folks, they might not put these two paths together. I've come to understand that my practice of Zen helps me to understand Jesus, and my study of the life of Jesus helps me to understand Zen. I mean, in these two worlds that are so beloved to me, Buddhism has as its central enlightening experience deep awareness, right? It's a kind of skillful awareness. It's a kind of insight into the nature of reality. The Christian enlightenment experience is the experience of deep love and belovedness. And so you put these two things together, insight and awareness about the nature of reality with belovedness. And maybe you could see why it was as if, oh, I was breathing more deeply than I'd ever breathed before. To use a different metaphor, but the same principle, it was like I was trying to fly with only one wing, which is to say, I was going in circles. And so when I found this other wing, that my life, my body, my soul could fly in a way that I didn't know was possible. Of course, we were set up on this blind date without her permission. I had no idea, right? I only discovered this afterward, and I'd wondered why she seemed, I mean, so disinterested in being there for the first, hour or so. And so she was using her Buddhist practice to try and scare me away. She thought that this little Catholic boy might be terrified of this Buddhist practitioner. In fact, I was incredibly intrigued. She didn't know she was sort of feeding me with the food that I didn't even know I was hungry for. Um, and so, yeah, so I'm, equally at home in Christian monasteries and Buddhist monasteries. To my Christian friends, I'm the Buddhist guy. To my Buddhist friends, I'm the Christian guy. I'm just me, because at the end of the day, when we look out at the sunset, there's no Christian sunset or Buddhist sunset or Hindu sunset. There's just the sunset. This is ultimate reality, and all these religious systems, incredibly beautiful, but they're just fingers pointing at the moon. And we must never mistake the finger for the moon. All right. So, like, for example, like when I'm going on retreat to, one of my favorite monasteries, Zen Mountain Monastery, and in New York, there's a little sign on the road that says, Zen Mountain Monastery this way. I would never park my car at the sign and say, oh, I've arrived. No, I would go in the direction that the sign is pointing. And all these systems, they're imperfect, right? They're embedded in language, and they're all pointing, however imperfectly, with our, these constructs, all this language, ultimate reality, this mystery that poets and mystics and sages are all trying to name. And maybe one day we'll know it even more fully than we know it now.
And there may be a principle or practice in either of the two systems that you've named that allows you to do this, but I would love to hear a little bit more from you around what allows you to have this deep diversity in how you perceive and how you kind of feel. And there doesn't seem to be a strict allegiance or rigidness to either system of thinking or perceiving the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll talk about maybe the practice in just one moment. My physicist friends have helped me understand how these two realities can live inside of me. And, it's sort of like holding the quantum world and the Newtonian world at the same time, right? So the rules that govern big things and the rules that discover compel subatomic things are completely different. And yet both are simultaneously true. How could that be? How could things behave under some rules at the subatomic level and under different rules at the macro level? Who really knows? And this is part of the physicist's mind, heart, and body to hold this together. And so I don't know. They're both simultaneously true, these paths. And as you say, we need practices to ground us in this holding. And for me, my primary practice well, I shouldn't say my primary practice. I have so many practices, but one of the practices that really grounds me is Zazen, breath meditation. And I learned Zazen at Zen Mountain Monastery. I learned Zazen from Christian Benedictine monks. I learned Zazen in a beautiful mindfulness-based stress reduction class at UMass Medical School with my wonderful teacher, Lynn Corbel. This radical willingness, this courageous willingness to be with whatever is arising here in the moment, here in the body, with some kind of anchor of awareness. It could be the breath, it could be any of the senses. For me, it's primarily breath work. And I can remember sitting in that kind of dusty little hospital basement, and it was as if a million worlds were revealed to me. It was as if parts of my life that I didn't even know were missing were delivered back to me. It was as if parts of my bodily experience that I had not even been aware of, that I had numbed, that I had been too scared to open myself up to, were suddenly available to me. And that moment set me on a path. And I couldn't even comprehend how big of a buffet table I was feasting at in that moment, right? And I'd heard, my therapist, a wonderful somatic practitioner who just passed away last year. He used to say, "Okay, now Brandon, breathe and tell me where you feel that in the body." Right? Something that many of us practitioners have said to so many of our dear, dear beloved clients so many times. And I thought, if he says that one more time, I am out of here and I'm never coming back. And then one day, I mean, who knows why? Who knows what shifts? Who knows, was it what I had for breakfast? Was it the weather? Was it his endless compassion and patience and his willingness just to bear witness to me and my frustration? And something opened up and it was like, oh, here's my life. Here's my life and here's my body. And these are not two separate things. And here's my life and my body and God. And all of these things are different expressions for the same thing. Whoa. I don't know. This sounds like nonsense, I suspect, to some folks. And yet I can tell you that it completely shifted everything for me. And so breath practice, Zazen, has been the ground of my practice. And I have many other practices too. But that's the kind of mother practice at the heart of everything else.
I would love to kind of directly ask how you see an interreligious practice enriching the experience of both embodiment and faith.
Yeah, thank you. Well, ironically, it was my Buddhist friends that pointed me back to my body. And they pointed me back to my own sacred texts within Christianity. And they pointed me back to Jesus. And while I've never been lucky enough to meet the Dalai Lama's instruction always is go back to your root tradition. Of course, it's beautiful to explore, and of course, we can embrace new traditions, but not without a deep reverence and study of your own root tradition first. I thought, well, okay, gosh, I'm sitting here trying to be a Buddhist, and all my Buddhist teachers are telling me to go be a Christian. Maybe there's something I haven't discovered, and I use the word ironically because, of course, at the center of the Christian mystical tradition is part of Christianity which says that the body is pregnant with the divine. Literally, that's the phrase that Meister Eckhart would have used in the late Middle Ages, right? He's called a heretic for speaking like that. That the body is continuous with the divine. This Christian mystical teaching suggests that there is no separation between your life and the big life of God. In fact, the body is so sacred and so beautiful that in the person of Jesus, Christians believe that the divinity and humanity commingle. And that in fact is, that's our true nature. That's our destiny. It's our source. And it's who we really are at the deepest level. And my Buddhist friends were the first to teach me that. And so the real generosity of some of my Buddhist teachers, my Zen teachers, to help me understand that, helped me to come home to my own Christianity in a way that I hadn't before. And it also sort of gave me permission to lean into my Buddhist practice because, gosh, these Buddhist practice knew something about Jesus. And so they were trustworthy. And I came across a wonderful teacher, Robert Kennedy, a Jesuit priest who's both a Zen teacher and a Catholic priest. And so I learned that these two paths were really one path. And as much as this is incongruous to many, this has been, this has been my home. So Jesus' willingness to be in his body over and over, that there is no finding the divine apart from the beauty and apart from the pain of having a body.
This is a large question, so I do want to give that bracket, but I would really love to hear your perspective and what you've come to know about how the body has been kind of removed away from religion or spirituality, because so much of the teaching, or a lot of teachings, kind of frame spirituality or religion as overcoming the body or coming up and out. And then one of the things that I love most dearly about somatics is that it starts to challenge this narrative in a really direct way, and then allows people who may be new to spirituality or religion to start to question, actually, maybe my body is a place that is sacred. Maybe that faith and that connection does exist here. So I'd love to hear from you about some of that rupture and where that originally comes from when we speak of spirituality or religion.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for this question. Oh, it's big, it's tender, it's heartbreaking, it's violent, it's patriarchal, it's oppressive, it's colonial. I'm going to try and I'm going to take a breath and say that well, let me first say that part of the engine that Christianity runs on is not actually original to Christianity, but it comes a couple hundred years after the Jesus experience. And that is the integration of Greek philosophy and the Jesus experience. And so, in much of the Greek philosophical tradition in the first century and the few hundred years before, there is a very definite split between matter and body. And so, when Christianity decides to embrace the Greek philosophical system as its engine, as its framework, which becomes especially important in exporting Christianity throughout the Roman Empire and the Greco-Roman world, and especially when Christianity becomes synonymous with empire, right? In 313, with Constantine converting and requiring everyone in the empire to become Christian, we have the kind of dualistic split happening in official ways, right? To be a Christian means to be a member of an empire, a conquering empire, an enslaving empire. And at the center of this is this war, not just in the external world between Rome and whoever they try to enslave, but this war between flesh and spirit. And you pick this up in certainly even earlier than this, in some of the writings of Paul, some of the misinterpretations of Paul make this really over accentuated, where body and spirit are in conflict. And so, as you say, this up and out movement, becomes the beating heart, sadly, of Christianity. And of course, if you know where to look, you find important counterpoints to this. You find experimental communities where people are, instead of going out and up, they're going down and deep. Women's communities, medieval women's communities, who are falling in love with Jesus, who are feeling all the feels, as my kids would say, who are incredibly embodied for the time. What we have happening throughout the Middle Ages, as we are bereft of any images of feminine images of God, right? We lose any goddess images that would have been prevalent in the ancient world, and of course they're replaced with very masculine images of God the Father and even Jesus. We have the probably the most common image throughout all of Western Christian medieval Europe, anyway, is the image of Mary, the goddess image, the one who's pregnant with the divine. Right. And so if you really want to look for embodiment, you look at women's communities who've centered their life around Mary. Now, of course, even this gets complicated because Mary has this overlay of obedience, which is ironic because in the words that she spoke from the Bible, she talks about overturning systems of greed and patriarchy. And so it's ironic. Yet, right. So you always have to sort of peel back all of these masculine layers, all of these layers of bodily suppression to find some of these moments of embodiment in the tradition. And it's been, gosh, the work of so many womanist and feminist scholars in the last century who have courageously tried to uncover, recover, and invite us to return to the sacredness of this flesh and bone. Because God shows up, I believe, disguised as your life. God shows up in your body. You don't get to discover the divine anywhere else except in this body. So there's no transcending, there's no moving past. And here's one of these kernels that's been hiding in plain sight in the Christian tradition anyway. Orthodox Christians, most Christians believe that even when you return to your source, I'll use this language, go to heaven. I don't like to use that language because, spirituality is not about going to heaven. So as if it's somewhere else, right? But, just to use the common phrase, even when you return to source, is how I prefer to say it, you bring your body with you. Your body's not destroyed in the process, right? We call it resurrection of the body. It's literally a standing up of the body, standing up in your fullness, in your wholeness. That's Orthodox Christianity. And yet we've forgotten it, right? And so we think the body needs to be punished or transcended, or, especially in systems of patriarchy, women's bodies need to be used in a very certain way for the pleasure, for the comfort of men. And so much of what I see as my teaching and my vocation is to dismantle all of this teaching and see, is there something here to recover about embodiment within this mystical Christian path?
Really appreciate so much of what you shared there and just the process of uncovering and kind of relearning. And also just that there's like the wisdom is right there in front of all of us, like just right there. It's so obvious in that last moment of what you described. And I would love to hear from you around maybe even what that process has looked like in dismantling what you've kind of come across that maybe you were never expecting to, because I do imagine this wasn't necessarily an easy place to find yourself, or a perspective that it sounds like it's taken time.
Oh, yeah. All the good stuff takes time, right? Again, our culture wants immediate and fast. And it seems to me, it's been my experience anyway, that the spiritual life is slow, is not linear, of course. It's forward, it's back, it's side to side, it's stopping. But this was the slow work of working with a somatic practitioner who was always inviting me back to the body. What are you feeling? What's this experience for you? And so I finally was able to welcome this stream of information into my life in a really powerful way. And so the first step is always here, is always yourself, right? Remember from my childhood, my initial awakening was a kind of a collective hope. It was the dream that we as a society could be together in a more peaceful way, where all people could be valued for infinite worth, right? I wanted to save the world, even as a 7-year-old. And of course, what I discovered after experiencing some trauma in my life and some deep family conflict that I thought would rip my family apart, and that brought me to my knees and helped me to see my own patterns, and my own numbing and my own avoidance, all the programming, especially in a male body, that says you don't feel anything. Feelings are dangerous. Feelings make you vulnerable. Feeling emotions make you less of a man, right? And so then when I could actually just feel my feelings as a human, then it opened me to understand, gosh, what does my partner feel like as a woman, as a dancer? As a dancer who trained in dance for years, and who'd been visible and who'd been experiencing the male gaze for decades and was exhausted and needed me as a partner to understand what it was like to be in a woman's body. Of course, I can't know that, but I love her and I trust her. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is the first step of my awakening was here in this body. And then it opened me up to understanding how other people move through their bodies and how they show up in time and space. Right. I thought, oh wow, there's so much happening here that I'm curious about, and so much I've missed, and so much I've been ignorant about. Right. And so that led me down, the path of feminism, and really learning how to stand up as an aspiring ally to women and be able to, as a man, speak about the patriarchy and invite men to hear how women's bodies have been managed and controlled and oppressed, and invite them not to crumble, right, in this fragility. Like, what is it about men who are not able to sit and talk about this system? And maybe not take it quite so personally, or maybe take it personally in quite the right way, but without absolutely crumbling under the weight of this. So we have to learn to lean in. But it all started with that question from my therapist: what does it feel like in your body? And gosh, I have a cry feeling just remembering how sacred that question was.
In your time working with men, and I know you work across a diverse spectrum, what do you feel like has been really helpful when you are encountering that fragility. I know for myself, when I'm working with someone, it is often anchoring it back in the body of being like, okay, like what is the sensation right now? And moving away from the story and kind of titrating in and out. But I know that we work very differently and work with different people. And so I would love to hear from you a little bit more about how you encounter that fragility.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I did primarily men's work for about 15 years. And so I got to learn not only from my own experience as a man, but what's helpful and what's not so helpful. And inviting men to reflect on moments when they've felt emotions that they're more comfortable with. Like, when have you felt joy? Is a question that I often start with, right? Because when have you felt deep sadness or restlessness or fear can be a little tender and a little too scary for men. And so inevitably, men will start talking about when their child was born, right? What it was like, uh, those who had this experience, when when their naked newborn child was placed on their bare chest. Wow, even as a father, my two daughters, I remember that moment. But how do you even describe a moment when your humanity meets someone else's, when your beating heart, right, comes into unison with another new life, right? And so it's about finding those easily accessible moments. And some men can go quite there. And of course, when men start talking about children, gosh, it will take them to vulnerable moments that maybe are places to do some deeper work. Men who are not in touch with their emotional life, they might want to talk about, when their favorite sports team won. Right, the sports is often the place where men feel safe to share emotions, right, side by side. I mean, men are all over one another in a sports game. They're hugging, they're touching, they're squeezing each other, they're crying, they're laughing, and that's been a part of my life too, right? Being an undergraduate at the University of Notre Dame, football takes over life. And to talk about the way in which we access emotion as men in a way that we might not otherwise. It's also just about, for me, working with men, it's just about having a ton of compassion and gentleness. The patriarchy was given to them and it oppresses them too in a different way. They benefit in a way that sometimes they're not aware of, but it contracts, it suppresses their life. Their wholeheartedness is limited too. So in my more grounded moments, I can show up with a lot of compassion for the systems that we've received, the roles that we've received, the personas we've received, right? Persona just comes from the Greek word for stage mask. Those beautiful theater masks that we see, symbols of the theater, right? That's a persona in Greek. We're playing a role, but it's not who we really are. And often, with some tenderness, with lots of compassion, with time, I've discovered men are quite willing, quite thankful to let go of some of these roles and to find, maybe some new tenderness and in it, like a fierce strength that they didn't know that they had, right?
How did working with men for so long maybe change the relationship you had with your body?
Oh gosh, what a question. Yeah, I think what I've learned over time as a man who grew up playing sports, who really valued a kind of athletic performance, a kind of mastery over the body, that it's not about control. And that most of us as men have inherited this value of control, that we're supposed to control our bodies and that we are supposed to control other people's bodies, our children, maybe even the women in our lives. And how bankrupt control is, because of course it's an illusion. There is no control. We have no control. And quantum mechanics has demonstrated this, right? On the molecular level, like everything is completely out of control. And these systems of control, they never deliver on the promise that they make, right? Control promises that I'll be at peace, that I'll be worthy, that I'll be happy, that I'll have love, that I'll feel like I'm enough. And of course, it's a bottomless pit. It's a drug. It's never enough. And it never actually brings the kind of enoughness and contentment and worthiness that it purports to deliver. And so this is so much of the work that I've done with men over the years. And they tell me how hard it is to relinquish control, but they tell me what a relief it is to not try to manage. And I see this in my own body. I've played volleyball with this, I mean, with one particular person in the same group of souls for years and years, probably since I was 25. And if there was anything I was particularly good at, it was volleyball. And it's no surprise maybe that at least growing up in the 80s, volleyball was a women's sport. You had to really go and look for spaces where men were even allowed to play volleyball. And at age 50, my body can't do what it did when it was 25. It's not as fast. It's not as responsive. I literally can't control it the way I used to be able to. And I was just talking with my beloved partner over coffee this morning, and she said, "What a gift to lose control. That what your body really needs right now is your compassion and your acceptance and your tenderness, and you're willing to feel all of these changes." And yeah, if I'm honest, there are parts of me that don't want to accept that. Right? I want to keep worshiping at the cult of perfection and youth and control. And yet that's not the way our bodies work. And so I've got to be gentle with my body. I want to be gentle with this home of mine that's kept me so safe and tried to protect me in so many ways, tried to protect me with control. And yet I can realize that, oh, I can be actually safe in my body without trying to manage, control, and perfect it. And so, yeah, I think it's that lesson of control is and letting go of it is something that I'll learn until I take my last breath.
From all your experience, what do you feel like religion and spirituality have to offer the realm of embodiment or the movement of somatics that oftentimes gets hidden away? Because at least in the circles that I'm in, spirituality sometimes will be spoken about in regards to the body and trauma and healing, but religion is often very much left out, even though, as I've heard you speak today, you've so eloquently described the intersection of why these practices and these ways of seeing the world and believing in the world and knowing the world to be are foundational and so important to our sense of embodiment or coming home.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I mean, I want to be really clear that religion, like any system, can do great violence in the world and has done great violence. In the way that humans do violence to one another, in the way that capitalism does violence to one another, in the way that governments do violence to one another. And so I'm not naive. If we had another 5 hours to talk, Ailey, we could unpack the countless instances of violence and dehumanizations done in the name of religion. We could, just look at the way Christian nationalism currently is is dehumanizing countless millions of souls. So I want to name that very clearly, that I see my work as standing firmly against anything that dehumanizes. The way I think about this is that let me overstate this. In the West, in the Christian tradition anyway, we have neglected the body and only talked about spirit for 2,000 years. And so we're kind of reclaiming conversation about the body. It would also be a mistake to only talk about the body and not talk about the spirit. To use that metaphor again, the opportunity is to breathe with both lungs or to fly with both wings. Body and spirit are made for one another. They're just two different names for the same reality, right? And to only name this reality in one way is just it's not so much that it's wrong, it's just that we're missing the fullness of reality. It's as if we only loved sunrises and we didn't appreciate sunset, or we didn't appreciate midday, right? It's about living into the fullness of who we are. And at least for me, I believe the fullness of who we are is spirit and body. This amazing dance between the two, the collaboration between both is it's a kind of dance, to use the Sufi image, right? This sort of whirling that great poet Rumi gave to us as a way of describing dancing, this dance with the divine, this interplay between body and spirit. So yeah, we need both. And at certain moments, we're going to maybe find the language of the body particularly persuasive, and we're going to develop fluency and somatics. That's beautiful. And then maybe at another season of our life, we're going to develop some fluency for the language of the spirit, right? So I think about this also in a seasonal way, along with a kind of integrative way. So that's why I think about your work in the world and so many somatic practitioners. Gosh, we need all of it. And we need spiritual teachers to also give voice to this reality too. So, the mind always wants to go into either or mode, into binary mode. It's in fact the test of truth for me, if there's any test, if there could be any test. It's that wisdom requires paradox. That's how you know you've stumbled on something that's true. It requires paradox. It requires speaking in two different ways simultaneously. And that's all I'm trying to do. It's all I hope I ever am doing. And whenever I make a mistake, whenever I'm getting it wrong, and we're all going to get it wrong imperfectly, it's probably because I'm falling on one side of or the other in terms of holding both spirit and body.
How do you bring the paradox of spirit and body to the work that you do in leadership? Because I know that that has been a big piece of your work.
Yeah, well, this is where we come back to practice. This is where, the first thing we do in the Leaders Way program, which is just a beautiful confluence of leaders who come from all over the world in many different contexts, and they come here to Yale and they spend a week together meditating and praying and thinking and wondering and dreaming about the kinds of solutions that our world needs, the kind of healing that the wounds of the world need. And what we do before we do almost anything else is we choose a practice. And so I might be teaching centering prayer. I might be teaching Zazen. We might invite a yoga teacher to come in and teach. There might be another practice that one of the participants brings. But we practice our way to embodiment. We don't just talk about it, right? This is always the temptation, right? We want to sit and read all these delicious books, and the mind is always a few steps ahead of where the body actually is, right? So we kind of talk a big game, and yet our sweet bodies are maybe a few steps behind. I don't know. uh, Everything is grounded in a contemplative practice where we actually have to show up and meet the truth of what's happening in our experience. How do you sit with the discomfort of a world that's on fire, that's disappointing, that's heartbreaking? How do you sit with your fellow Americans who want to dehumanize the people you love, or want to dehumanize you, or want to take away your rights? How do you sit with the rage and the grief and the sorrow and the violence that's within all of our bodies when we meet the violence of the world? We have to be honest about what's arising, and we have to be willing to sit with the discomfort of that. Right? If you want to be a lighthouse, you got to be willing to sit in the storm, right? We all want to be light. It's all unicorns and rainbows until the storm comes. And so really, what we're trying to do in the realm of spiritual innovation is is learning to be in the storm and to be with the truth of what we're experiencing. Because if you can feel anything and everything that this body can feel, then you're free. And then you will be more available to be love and compassion in the world, but not until you take care of your own discomfort, your own woundedness first. I remember this moment in my life. My daughter was celebrating, I think, her 10th birthday. And I got up really, really early. I wanted to get things ready. My wife had beautifully decorated the house, and I was tiptoeing around the house, and I accidentally so 5 o'clock in the morning, I slammed my finger in the door and I broke my finger. And it was a gnarly, bloody nightmare of a mess. And I quickly bandaged it up. I'm very squeamish, and I didn't even look at it. I knew that if I looked at it, I would pass out and I wouldn't be able to celebrate my daughter's birthday. And for 2 days, I kept my wound buried under the bandage, and it hurt. It hurt more and more every day, more and more every day. And my wife said, you need to see a doctor. And I went into the doctor. It was this wonderful nurse. She said, "Well, you have to take the bandage off," and the bandage had like congealed and had fused to my body. And it took me 10 minutes, mindfully, slowly trying to get the bandage off, and finally, I had to sort of rip it off. And everyone has had this experience of literally ripping off the bandage, right? Excruciating pain, and I'm yelling, and she's literally laughing at me. And she took one look at the wound and she said, "Oh, that's awful. That's just disgusting." I said, "I'm pretty sure that's not how you're supposed to talk to your patient." So the doctor came in. He said, "You really should have come in days ago." He bandaged it up. He said, "Here's what you need to do every day." He said, "You need to change the bandage." And I knew what that would mean, that I'd have to look at my wound every day, look at my wound. And of course, there's that beautiful wisdom of Rumi that I'd heard so many times. Keep looking at the bandaged place. That's how the light gets in you. And of course, it's really, really hard. So that's what we do. In leadership, we begin with our practice and we sit with the discomfort. And then once we learn how to just come home to ourselves and be with whatever's arising. And it's not all discomfort too, right? Sometimes it's delight and joy and play, and sometimes it's boredom, and sometimes it's everything. It's everything we can experience. Then we can begin to really be of service in a world that's aching, every moment aching, and needs us more than ever.
Thank you so much for that. There were so many tidbits of wisdom in what you just shared. And my final question for you today is, if the listener just remembers one thing from our time together today, what would you like that to be?
Oh, thank you. I would want them to remember that they could come home to themselves, and that as unsafe as that we all can feel in these bodies, and sometimes it's so scary, isn't it, to feel what these bodies can feel, is that in fact there is a possibility to come home to yourself, that your body can be a place of home, um, and that you may need to find a beautiful somatic practitioner, to walk with you, to hold your hand, to echo back to you that you're safe, that it's okay to feel. You may need a friend, you may need a guide, but that the body can be a place of home. And it can be a place of encounter, not just with yourself and what you feel, but it can be a place of encountering this great, vast mystery that we name as the divine, spirit, love, and ultimate reality. And that the body is a place to discover that. I know it's been true for me. I know it's been true for many people. And I hope that listeners might remember that is a real possibility here in this body.
Thank you so much for your time today, but also all the time that you have spent exploring and learning and reading, but also feeling into your body so that you could really weave together two systems, but so much more that you weaved in that oftentimes don't get spoken about together. And I really appreciated your capacity to hold such a diversity with such care and kindness and respect. It was really, really wonderful to spend this time with you. I always ask and every guest if they have anything upcoming or anything ongoing. If the listener wanted to hear more or experience more, where could they find you?
Thank you. Thank you for holding this space and convening these important conversations. Folks can find me where I'm most active teaching and practicing, and that's on Instagram, Brandon.Nappi. I'm also newly on Insight Timer. And so if meditation practice is important to you or you're curious about it, you can find me there. And I lead retreats from time to time here in New England, here in Connecticut this fall, this October. And of course, here at Yale. So come and find me. Increasingly, what my office will do is make the teaching that I do available to the worldwide community so that you don't have to apply to Yale and be a student here at Yale to actually be a learner here in the Yale community. So yeah, stay in touch. Find me on Instagram is really the easiest place.
Thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you, Ailey.
If you found value in this episode, it would mean so much to me for you to share the podcast with friends, a loved one, or on your social platforms. If you have the time, please rate and review the podcast so that this podcast reaches a larger audience and can inspire more and more humans to connect to their bodies too. Thank you for being here and nurturing the relationship you have with your very own body.